It is now round 5 of benzene in your products is giving you cancer, and I am ready to get off this train. First, it was hand sanitizer, and I was trying to stop being a hand sanitizer influencer. Then it was sunscreen, and I took that personally. As an Australian and as one of the internet's leading sunscreen connoisseurs, I made a video about why it wasn't as scary as people were making it sound, and I thought, whew, glad that's over. Oh, we are just getting started, you stupid. Then it was deodorant, and I don't need that stuff, I think. Round 4, dry shampoo. When this dermatologist said it was worse than cigarettes, I almost made a video, but now it is benzoyl peroxide and it is time. I've had a lot of time over the last 3 years to go down this one lab keeps scaring people about benzene rabbit hole, and the whole thing is just so many different flavors of wild. There's too much to cover. I'm just going to stick to mostly the science stuff, but if there are any drama channels watching, there is some good stuff here. So today we're going to go through my opinions on what this lab is saying about benzoyl peroxide, what they're saying about benzene, a whole bunch of red flags about their ability to measure stuff and just like read things. We're also going to dip a bit into possible explanations for all of this mess, like why can't they read, allegedly. Starting with benzoyl peroxide, here's what happened, Valissure's version. Benzoyl peroxide acne products form benzene, a known human carcinogen, at unacceptably high levels. This sounds really scary, and in my opinion, it's meant to for reasons we will discuss. And it worked. Lots of posts, lots of panic, just based on what Valisure said, and sometimes not even that.
Hi guys, I haven't read the report, but I really just wanted to talk about benzoyl peroxide and benzene. I really need the views, I really need the likes, guys!
I've talked about peer review and how much gets through. There's been more examples lately, and it also looks like people are using ChatGPT to do the peer review. So we need to be more careful with something that hasn't even gone through that. First, let's add if stored at unrealistically high temperatures here. In Valissure's petition, the results start by mentioning that they tested products they bought, and then they kept them at these temperatures and tested them. But for mysterious reasons, they don't tell us the specific numbers for the lower, more normal temperatures, which is a bit weird because their previous benzene petitions had all these huge tables of them. They give us all these pretty graphs for 50 and 70 degrees Celsius, and one product that they tested at 40 degrees. This is a huge red flag to me as a chemist because heat makes reactions happen faster, so benzoyl peroxide will break down faster, and that means you get more of a benzene buildup. It's like if you use up a perfume with one spray a day, then the level stays acceptable, the perfume molecules drift off over time so you don't end up just smellier and smellier every day. But if you use up the bottle a lot faster, you spray the whole bottle on yourself in like 3 hours, then there is just way more smell. Valisure say these temperatures are reasonable, and they have citations for this. So let's use one weird trick for spotting dodgy science doctors hate her. Actually read the citations. For 50 degrees, it's a reasonable temperature during distribution and handling by consumers, citing the FDA. But if you go to the FDA website and find the bit they're talking about, they actually mention 40 degrees. 50 degrees is also supposedly an accepted incubation temperature for accelerated stability studies. These are when you heat up a product to approximate what happens normally, but faster? Acceleration? Valisure cite this paper from a journal whose homepage doesn't exactly inspire great confidence. You can actually hover over these and try to get them to line up. The paper mentions 50 degrees once with no reference. So you really have to ask why Valisure decided to cite this random paper instead of the official international standards that this paper mentions and even put into a nice table so you don't actually have to go look them up yourself. I wonder why. Is it because the standard accelerating testing temperature is 40 degrees? That's kind of awkward. It's actually really considerate of the authors to have all of this right in the paper, so you just need to know how to read to find it. I'm so sorry I keep ragging on this journal you chose, but you knew what you were getting into when you had to chase the submission link across the page. 50 degrees is usually used for stress testing, which is different from accelerated testing, as you can see in these official FDA guidelines. The FDA who they're supposedly writing this petition to, who they could have totally cited instead. You are meant to get false positives in stress testing, so if the product decides to separate, then you check that it's actually likely to happen at normal temperatures before you try to fix it. But stress doesn't really match this whole reasonable temperature vibe they're going for. And there's this Valisure blog post that quotes this FDA page to justify 50 degrees for accelerated testing. And a few paragraphs up under accelerated studies, it actually explains that if you heat something up too much, it can react in ways that it doesn't at room temperature. There are a whole bunch of repeated themes in this video, so to help us keep track of everything, I'm just going to stick this here. Now, interestingly, at the start, Valisure cite a paper that cites another paper with rate constants, which we can use to calculate how quickly benzoyl peroxide breaks down. And interestingly, you can see when benzoyl peroxide would start to break down completely in their testing time of 18 days. It's 50 degrees. Maybe it's a coincidence? Then Valisure took the products that didn't produce much benzene and then heated them up even more because why not? They also say 70 degrees is a reasonable temperature, and again, they cite the FDA saying 40 degrees, and it's within the reported temperature range of a hot car. Except if you Google hot car temperature, you don't see 70 degrees, it's more like 50 to 60 degrees. So they cherry-picked another paper where 70 degrees is actually how hot a car can get, the maximum temperature recorded if you park it in the sun in Athens, Georgia, and it's over 34 degrees. So the car would only be sometimes above 70 degrees Celsius for the 14 to 18 days that Valisure tested if the sun didn't set. And this is after the products had been sitting at 50 degrees, so this experiment is essentially simulating the extremely reasonable conditions of you parking your car in the sun and the sun not setting for 14 to 18 days after 18 days of the hottest temperature ever recorded in Australia. Global warming is bad, but it's not that bad.
So far.
We're going to need this one again later. Like and subscribe so I can buy better sticky notes. They also cite an online calculator to say 43 days at 70 degrees is equivalent to 3 years at normal temperatures in accelerated testing. Again, that FDA page they cited explains why high temperatures can give invalid predictions. According to the formula used by the calculator, 13 minutes at 75 degrees is equivalent to a day and a half in the fridge, so I should have a perfect sous vide egg in here. I've always wanted to make sous vide eggs from scratch, but I'm just really lazy, so I started and ended by just leaving this in the fridge. I don't know why, but part of me thought that would actually work. Valishure's paper actually says that at 70 degrees, the product packaging ruptured in a week, which, according to this calculator, is 5 months normally. Benzoyl peroxide generally doesn't hulk out of its container at 5 months. It's like their own experiment is trying to tell them this. Also, if this doesn't say something about the utter state of peer review, Valishure's paper has some of the same citations, including this. I actually think ChatGPT could have improved the peer review here. Also, isn't it a bit weird to do your big announcement a week before your peer-reviewed paper comes out? We're going down that rabbit hole later. I just wanted to really quickly address this. I've seen some people say that it's possible the products get this hot in trucks and in warehouses before the product even gets to the store, but even Valisure don't say this. Benzoyl peroxide is an over-the-counter drug in a lot of countries, including the US, and that means that, by law, the temperatures are controlled until it gets to the pharmacy. This is designed so that it is really hard to mess up. They use things like temperature sensors to monitor shipments. If this was a widespread problem, then most sunscreen just would not work. If you're getting it delivered to your house, then it's the same as for sunscreen, just don't order it in the middle of summer. The petition does have one experiment at 40 degrees for 17 hours, which I would say is actually a reasonable temperature. But again, their reasoning is just bizarre. It's the approximate temperature a bathroom can reach during a hot shower, and everyone say it with me, it's not what the paper says. It gets above 35 degrees in summer, sometimes for like 15 minutes. I'm guessing they read the graph wrong. They thought these humidity lines were temperature, or maybe this was the best reference they could find to explain themselves, and they were hoping we would all read the graph wrong. I'm not sure which one is more likely at this point. It's gonna get worse. This level of citation abuse for a petition with 2 science PhDs as authors, they should know how to read. In my opinion, the best explanation is they are using artificially high temperatures to get more dramatic results, and they're trying to convince us that they didn't. Valisure collected measurements at normalish temperatures too, but they barely put any info about them in the petition, which is, again, unusual for them. Kinda. 5 days after the petition, and a lot of people, including me, had roasted their temperature choices, Valisure posted this article that doubled down but also gave more info. They point out that the first column in these graphs is before heating, which a lot of us had already worked out. It's hard to read these because of the scale, some of the later ones are clearer, but with some extremely scientific methods, it looks like it goes from around 20 parts per million for the highest to less than 0.1 parts per million. If we assume nothing weird happened before they tested them, and if they measured the benzene levels correctly. Foreshadowing. Now, some of these are higher than 2 parts per million, which is a common limit for benzene in oral medications, and that's not great. But official safety limits are generally pretty precautionary. How scary are these numbers actually? According to Valisure, very. Imagine Valisure being dramatic. Now, benzene isn't good for you, and I think it's great that regulations are reducing our exposure. This is exactly the sort of thing I think government regulations should be targeting. But the commentary makes it sound like, well, what all the TikToks are saying.
We're literally rubbing cancer into our skins.
What they say is technically true, but it's presented in a way that ends up being misleading, because most of the people reading their press release and petition don't know much about benzene. It's this. If you have this, throw it out. It has sodium chloride, which is really dangerous. It's been linked to high blood pressure, kidney disease, and strokes. Everything my evil twin said about salt is technically correct, but it is ridiculous when it's tiny amounts in shampoo that you're not drinking. Presumably. I don't know your life. Anything can sound scary if you strip away the context.
Benzene is a group 1 carcinogen, known human carcinogen, and it's in the same category as asbestos, formaldehyde, and lead. So you wouldn't let your children or any of your relatives play with asbestos or lead. You're going to let them play with benzene?
This is Dr. Christopher Bunick. He's a dermatologist who is like Valishure's go-to toxicology spokesperson. They quote him a lot, he's on their paper, and he's the main person educating dermatologists about benzene. He's an editor at Dermatology Times, a popular magazine for dermatologists.
I have no financial relationship with Valisure.
If that's true, I feel a bit sorry for him because they are letting him say stuff for them that is pretty cringe if you know anything about benzene or toxicology. But other dermatologists usually also don't know much about benzene or toxicology, so a lot of them are just trusting and repeating what he says. And then that spreads to journalists and influencers who assume dermatologists know everything about skincare products, including ingredients that aren't usually in them. That's why you keep hearing phrases like known human carcinogen and this.
Any concentration of benzene greater than 0 is not safe. Lower left, there is probably no safe level of exposure to benzene.
Known human carcinogen and no safe level of benzene together? Yeah, it sounds genuinely scary.
We are rubbing cancer into our skin.
But scientists don't use words like normal people. We didn't become scientists because we English good. Group 1 or known human carcinogen just means that the evidence of a link is solid. It doesn't mean that you'll definitely get cancer if you're exposed to any amount. The dose still matters. He and or Valisure have cherry-picked the absolute scariest examples here. Some other known human carcinogens are processed meat, sunlight, and wine, which aren't great for you, but I really don't think he's knocking salami or wine out of his relatives' hands or locking them indoors. Maybe he is. One weird trick, relatives hate him. I don't know if adapted from David Light Valisure is because he's giving proper credit since he's just trusting them and not bothering to do a basic Google, or maybe he's covering his ass. No safe level is also weird toxicology language. It means that little bits will still add to the risk. So for example, if I tap this lightly enough, that is a safe level that didn't add to the risk of this falling off the table. But even drawing a teeny tiny dot is still going to increase the risk of this pen running out of ink. There is no safe level that I can draw. But dose still matters. There is a huge difference between a dot and coloring in a whole page. And this is really scary for benzene because we don't have context. But alcoholic drinks and sunlight are also known human carcinogens with no safe level of exposure. Any of the UV photons going into your skin could be the one that triggers cancer. But we don't freak out when we get a tiny bit of sunlight or drink a sip of wine because we know those are more like a tiny dot. Not everyone who gets tiny exposures to these will get cancer from them. So we need context. Is the benzene from these products a dot or a whole page of ink? Well, according to Valisure, one thing Valisure don't tend to mention is benzene is everywhere. It's in fossil fuels and our whole civilization has been running on fossil fuels for a really long time. There's about 1% or 10,000 parts per million of benzene in petrol, which is gasoline if you use Fahrenheit. Obviously, we don't purposely put this on our skin, and if you do, you should probably stop. But if you've ever accidentally touched some while filling up your car, then the benzene level is about 500 times higher than the worst benzoyl peroxide products at room temperature. But the main concern is usually breathing benzene, because it is in the air everywhere. You're breathing it right now. Oh yeah, Valisure did not bother telling us this when they said, there is not a safe level of benzene that can exist in any skincare product. Unless you're keeping your products completely sealed forever, there's going to be benzene from the air in there. And this brings us to what I think is the most mind-blowing part, and I can't decide if it's Valisure being really clever or ridiculously incompetent. Let me know what you think in the comments. Valisure used parts per million and parts per billion a lot to talk about how much benzene there is and compare different situations. But first of all, these units are calculated differently when we're talking about benzene in the air versus in everything else, like in products. I'm going to call this air and liquid ppm. Chemists, I know, don't at me. It's like degrees Celsius and degrees Fahrenheit, except scientists almost never say which ppm they're using, and we really need to get on that. Benzene is a big boy, so 1 ppm in the air, which is calculated per molecule, is 2.7 ppm if we calculate it by mass, like we would for products. But more importantly, these are concentrations. You can't directly compare concentrations, they aren't actual amounts. Eating a few grains of 100% salt, am I a real YouTuber now? Isn't 100 times more salt than eating a bag of chips with 1% salt in it just because you diluted your 11,500 grains of salt with potatoes. It's the amount of benzene, the dose, that we care about. To get the dose, we need to multiply the concentration by how much air we're breathing or benzoyl peroxide we're using. And the difference here is massive. We breathe about 15.5 cubic meters of air a day, which is about 250,000 of these tubes. So to work out how much benzene we breathe in a day, we multiply the air ppm by almost 50,000. But to work out how much benzene is applied in a benzoyl peroxide cream, we divide the ppm by about 1.5. And air ppm tells you how much is actually going into your lungs. But for products, skin doesn't absorb benzene as well and you won't breathe it all in. A lot of it is just going to float off. So the same ppm ends up being a lot more than 75,000 times the difference. And if that wasn't enough, being exposed to a whole bunch of benzene at once, like if you apply a product, is actually safer than the same amount over a longer time, like if you're breathing it in air. The enzymes in your body that turn the benzene into cancer-causing metabolites have a limited capacity. So if they're maxed out, less of it becomes carcinogenic. So because of all of that, we can't directly compare ppm in air to ppm in a product. Guess what Valisure do all the time, in my opinion? They'll talk about the liquid ppm in products and then the air ppm that causes health problems, without bothering to mention that these are not the damn same, the doses are thousands of times different. I don't know if Valisure have forgotten or they're hoping that we've all forgotten. Dose depends on concentration and amount. But maybe they're just listing examples, it's not that deep. They never thought people would interpret it as a direct comparison, even though the last 4 times everyone did interpret it that way. Let's look at these guys doing direct comparisons.
1.6 part per million as the threshold for starting to see leukemia risk increase. The benzene in their products range from 11 to 24 parts per million. Does anyone remember the number I told you? The increased threshold? 1.6?
These levels are approximately 0.0003 parts per million of benzene, or a third of 1 part per billion. And what Valisure is finding in hand sanitizers is over 50,000 times that limit, and in sunscreens over 20,000 times that limit.
Of course, there are extra choices here that makes this look even scarier. There's usually 2 to 4 times less benzene outdoors than indoors, and we spend most of our time indoors. These are the absolute highest outlier measurements Valisure got. But even if we just sort out this concentration dose thing, these comparisons are thousands of times too high. And it's really interesting watching this slide evolve. Here's the version after their anti-perspirant petition, liquid ppm. And then here is the dermatologist in 2022. For dry shampoo, they're actually using an experiment where they measured air ppm. It still isn't quite a fair comparison, but just for these two, they fixed it. They actually fixed it. But Then, at the 2024 AED meeting, he presented this slide, and they've added benzoyl peroxide, but they undid the thing that they fixed. It's gone up by 100 times. It's good to do a reality check after you finish a calculation, like people have been using benzoyl peroxide for 60 years. Are benzoyl peroxide users or people with acne thousands of times more likely to have leukemia? And benzene generally messes up blood counts before it starts to cause blood cancers. Do a lot more people with acne have abnormal blood counts? Do women who use dry shampoo that's meant to have 500,000 times more benzene than normal have that? Or are these wild comparisons? And even if that didn't cross their minds, shouldn't they realize it's weird that their new method that's meant to give 10 to 50 times higher results gave them a lower comparison? Wouldn't it be responsible to think about these things at some point in the last 3 years of publicity tours? Also, you can maybe see why they kept heating the crap out of benzoyl peroxide. These other numbers come from the very, very highest room temp measurement in each petition. Like for dry shampoo, this was the highest single spray from a can, not even an average from that can. So it looks like the absolute highest number for benzoyl peroxide was similar to antiperspirant, which was 17.7 ppm. And if you factor in how little benzoyl peroxide we use, this is the least dramatic product so far. It ends up being less than breathing outdoor air. Someone at Valisure seems to know this is wrong because in the 2021 sunscreen petition, they multiply the concentration by the amount to get the dose. But they follow with a different wild comparison to the safe dose of a completely different substance. This comes up a lot as well, where they don't seem to realize different things have different safe levels. 2 science PhDs signed this, plus this guy, and everyone keeps mentioning how they went to Yale. Yale, this is not a good look for you. Anyway, it is definitely interesting that they only remember to multiply by the product amount when it's big, although it still probably isn't half a cup of sunscreen per day. And then they use diluting with potatoes logic the rest of the time. So what does this risk look like if we calculate it like normal people who realize we don't inhale 250,000 tubes of benzoyl peroxide a day? This is a rough estimate, so there's a bunch of disclaimers. The lifetime risk of cancer is 1 in 2 for men, 1 in 3 for women. For the most Benzene benzoyl peroxide products, if we use this much every single day for a whole lifetime, which is 78 years, so literally from birth, you know how pimply those newborns are, and all of the benzene absorbed as well as it does in our lungs, we would have an increased cancer risk of about 8 in a million, which is 0.0008% on average per person. For comparison, here are some other sources of benzene and their calculated risk, like for cooking, filling up your car, existing. Valisure actually highlight a similar calculation in their press release. But in their wording, it sounds like if you left benzoyl peroxide in your hot car, you would have 1,000 times the risk of cancer, which sounds scary. But if we add in all this extra context, what they actually showed, if you left a bottle of benzoyl peroxide in your car in the full sun on a day that stayed really hot and sunny for 16.7 hours, that's 5 a.m. till 9:40 p.m., and then you got in your car and continuously breathed in that level of benzene for your entire lifetime, so 78 years, you would have an increased cancer risk of 0.0127% or 1 in almost 8,000. Or you can think about it this way. If 7,900 people all got into cars parked like that with benzoyl peroxide in them, without airing out the car first, not even a little bit, and then they all kept breathing in that level of benzene for 78 years, you would expect one of them to get cancer from the benzene. To me, that seems really reassuring. If you're wondering, the biggest thing you can probably do to reduce benzene exposure is not park your car in a garage attached to your house. That comes from probably the top benzene toxicology expert. He's the guy that they keep quoting for no safe level of benzene, and here's what he said about Valishure's sunscreen petition. I don't usually like downplaying public health risks, but I also don't like scaring the public unnecessarily when there's no need for that. I wonder what other experts have said about Valisure. Okay, no, I changed my mind. This is the most mind-blowing part for me. Valisure has also had petitions about carcinogens in medications with a very similar sort of vibe, press release, lots of media attention. The FDA took these concerns seriously, they investigated, and now there are multiple peer-reviewed papers specifically debunking Valishure's testing. And yeah, the FDA could just be really embarrassed that this tiny lab showed them up and they're just trying to save face. I seriously considered this at first, but firstly, If you look at the specific things being criticized, they are objectively pretty bad. Secondly, the FDA papers have been referenced positively in other papers like this, which also has authors from 11 other regulators and official testing labs from other countries. Valisure get a few shout-outs. And one author is from the Singapore HSA who announced this contamination in the first place. Also, the US Pharmacopoeia, they're an independent scientific body. They set a lot of popular ingredient standards and tests. USP grade refers to them. They've also put out a white paper criticizing Valishure's methods. Being specifically called out in publications connected to this many scientifically respectable organizations is really impressive, so let's look at what happened. Valisure talk a lot about NDMA and ranitidine. They mention ranitidine 7 times in the benzoyl peroxide petition. That's because in September 2019, Valisure got their big break. They announced that they found high levels of NDMA, a probable carcinogen, in ranitidine. I'm just going to call it Zantac. No one knows ranitidine. It is a heartburn medication. They also said Zantac could break down inside the body to make more NDMA, and the FDA should get independent labs like Valisure to test all medication before it gets sold. At the time, NDMA in other medications was a really big deal, so this got tons of attention. Lots of countries pulled Zantac off the shelves, including the US. Valisure are pretty proud of it, and I think they do deserve some credit for pointing out the problem. The FDA took it seriously. They released a statement saying they were investigating on the same day as Valishure's post. But here's the thing. Even though their petition triggered the investigation, Valisure didn't actually find any NDMA in normal tablets. They only found it when they used unrealistic conditions, like when they heated the samples too much to 130 degrees Celsius. Heat makes Zantac break down, so you get more NDMA. So the FDA couldn't actually use any of Valishure's data because their method was inappropriate. It gave artificially high results, often thousands of times too high. And this is a repeated theme. You'll see the word validation a lot. This basically just means checking that your method is actually measuring what you're trying to measure. Your numbers are actually telling you something useful. Valisure just don't seem to be great at validating their methods, and they don't seem to think they need to improve. Measuring chemicals is pretty complicated. On TV, you chuck a sample into a machine and like 3 seconds later, it tells you exactly what chemicals are in it and how much. But in reality, it takes ages. You need specific methods for every little thing because lots of stuff can go wrong. Let's say you have this perfect glass of cordial. To work out the recipe, you might mix different amounts of cordial and water and then compare how orange your perfect glass is to the glasses that you've just made. That's basically how these chemical analyses work, except you have a really complicated machine with lots of settings, seeing the color. There's a million other things in your sample that can mess up the machine and your results, so you have to process it first, which might interfere with the cordial, and the machine might think some of these things are cordial. Oh, and there is usually just a few drops of cordial in there. Lots of things can go wrong, plus if you're feeling cynical, lots of things can be like nudged a little bit to get higher or lower numbers, which is a big deal here because the number tells us the dose if something is safe or not. With NDMA, it turns out Valisure were using a method for a different medication where temperature didn't change the NDMA. When the FDA tried Valishure's procedure, the samples came out looking burnt. Valisure said the FDA was so downplaying the problem, but it is pretty widely accepted now that high temperatures will break ranitidine down to make more NDMA. The FDA explains the importance of validation in their reply to Valisure and explained how they developed and validated a new method. There's lots of helpful references, so maybe they can do it right the next time. Here's what happened the next time. In late 2019, Singapore's regulator found high NDMA in some batches of metformin, which is a diabetes drug. So a whole bunch of regulators around the world started testing metformin. The FDA posted the levels they found in some batches and a validated testing method. Then Valisure posted a petition claiming that they tested the same batches with an improved method, but they got different results. Guess who found way more carcinogen? Valisure said the FDA's numbers were too low, they should use Valishure's method, and the FDA should hire independent labs like Valisure to test all medication before selling it. Now, because of this international investigation, the FDA had already developed multiple validated methods, and they knew what concentrations other regulators were seeing. It was obvious that Valishure's numbers were off. But Valisure were already talking to the media about how the FDA was wrong, asking people to send them metformin for testing on Facebook and Twitter. They uploaded a PDF with a whole bunch of results so people could check their medications. They also kind of mansplained to the FDA why their method is wrong. Anyway, it turns out Valishure's method was wrong. The FDA tried to replicate it and worked out that Valisure were essentially using the wrong settings for their machines, so they measured a second chemical as NDMA as well. It was basically counting tomato sauce as cordial. So their results were an average of 5 times too high, up to 17 times too high. The FDA published a paper with a catchy title and wrote to Valisure pointing out, again, you need to validate methods properly. The FDA also inspected Valishure's lab in 2021, and this letter has a list of things they did that were pretty bad when they were operating as a pharmacy, like not telling people about illegitimate product quickly, but also a bunch of scientific deficiencies in their testing. Valisure still seemed to be doing the same things, using the same testing protocol for different products, which was the big issue with Zantac, and they seem to be doing this for benzene too. Different products have different things in them that could mess up your results, so you need to check that they still work individually. And there were other issues too, like they didn't check the calibration regularly, they didn't check if their preparation was breaking down the sample. They had an incorrect baseline construction. Basically, this area correlates with the concentration, but you have to draw where the line goes, and if you draw it wrong, you get a different number. And this is pretty basic stuff. I've used HPLC and LCMS a lot. This is stuff I was taught on the first day I touched the machine. Valisure kind of brushed off this critique by saying they're ISO accredited, so they're not subject to GMP requirements for validation. But I think it's really missing the point. Validation is important for any analysis. It's literally just making sure that you're getting good data. The reason it's in GMP guidelines is because it is just good scientific practice. If your numbers are wrong, they're wrong. It doesn't matter which lab you're in. And the FDA pointed this out. These are things that would be required for ISO as well. Maybe despite this worrying track record, they've improved, but it seems like a bad idea to just assume that their numbers are correct without having other scientists and testing labs critically reviewing and replicating their results. So why do regulators care so much about bad data? You can probably guess, but it is spelt out a bunch of times in these documents. Obviously, if the numbers are too low, then people are being exposed to carcinogens. The limit the FDA and a bunch of other regulators use is an estimated extra 1 in 100,000 lifetime risk of cancer, which translates to 0.001%. That's super low per person, but if you're regulating medications for millions of people, then yeah, that makes a difference. But it's also bad if the numbers are too high. Patients may decide to forego or change treatment for no good reason. It can create confusion and cause a public health risk. Metformin is one of the most widely used diabetes treatments. If you stop treating it, diabetes complications are not pretty. And the FDA aren't even looking at how Valisure are framing the results, which is what most of this video has been about. They are just talking about accuracy. The USP white paper looks at both and same problems. They can impact the behavior of health plans and patients, leading to drug shortages, and can even reduce patient adherence to their treatment regimens, which can cause harm and may even be life-threatening. And this applies to benzene too. I don't think anyone is against having less benzene in products, but announcing very sensationalized, unvalidated results with tons of media attention is a really dangerous way to go about it. It blows the risks out of proportion, which means that people are going to make bad risk assessments. Healthcare workers avoiding hand sanitizer because of a very small increased risk in cancer, that would be massively increasing the risk of infecting patients. Hand hygiene is a huge part of infection control. Sanitizer is a really useful addition to hand washing because that causes a lot more hand dermatitis. Sunscreen is an important part of skin cancer prevention. There are other forms of sun protection, but sunscreen protects in ways and on body parts that other methods don't do as well. Benzoyl peroxide is a really popular acne treatment, and it's affordable. It reduces antibiotic resistance, which is a huge problem. Acne is complicated. Not everything works for everyone. People try lots of treatments before finding one that works. Acne isn't as life-threatening as diabetes or skin cancer or hospital-acquired infections, but it can make a huge difference to your life. Scaring people about life-changing medications when it's not warranted can be incredibly damaging. Dry shampoo and antiperspirant aren't as big a deal, but still, the fear and panic that I've seen, people are crying on TikTok. I've had messages from people who haven't been able to sleep because they are so worried. That is probably way worse for your health than that tiny amount of benzene. And I'm not saying it's a bad idea for independent labs to test things every once in a while, but given their track record, Valisure just do not seem to me like the people that we should trust for this. And yes, there have been recalls because of benzene and NDMA. But these recalls aren't a sign that our products are killing us, which seems to be the main narrative. Products being recalled before anyone gets hurt because of issues that aren't expected to have serious consequences, this is a good sign that our products are generally very safe. It would be way more sus if there was this mysterious lack of recalls. And notice that when health authorities announce these issues, the risk is put into context because scaring people unnecessarily causes harm, although, unsurprisingly, these are less exciting, they got a lot less headlines. Daily exposure to benzene at the levels detected would not be expected to cause adverse health consequences. For metformin, the added cancer risk is estimated to be less than 0.00002%. So why are Valisure doing the opposite of this? Maybe they mean well, maybe they honestly think these are serious public health issues that need more attention. Maybe they're doing all this stuff because they're just bad at science, but they are really trying their hardest. Maybe they genuinely think the FDA will one day realize that they are the right people to check product quality. Maybe they just really can't take a hint. And a lot of people do think this.
Valisure, goddamn heroes.
But there's a lot of evidence that I think points towards this not being the case. Look, I am not a huge fan of just looking for profit motives when it comes to misinformation. People make mistakes, they're overconfident, they usually aren't evil, though sometimes they are both. And I'm not going to pretend I know what's going on in the big brains at Valisure, but here are some observations. The whole timing of this benzoyl peroxide announcement, March 6, which is 2 days before the AED meeting. This is the largest dermatology conference. Valishure's spokesderm friend actually wrote this on LinkedIn, just before hashtag AED 2024. And conveniently, he had a speaking spot so he could present this version of benzene science to thousands of dermatologists who the media and public would listen to, and who wouldn't have the background knowledge to question him.
There's a lot of confusion around how much benzene we're breathing in the air.
Yeah, I wonder why there's so much confusion. Now, 3 of the top people who were at Valisure have a patent application on stabilizing benzoyl peroxide. That's obviously a conflict of interest. By really hyping up the dangers and getting it in front of as many people as possible, they could potentially get everyone to pressure companies into using their technology and artificially driving up demand. This is a monetization strategy with a long, illustrious history. The most famous example was probably Andrew Wakefield. In 1998, he published a study linking the MMR vaccine to autism. Most of the data was fabricated, but unsurprisingly, there was a ton of media attention. In the many interviews that followed, he kept emphasizing that, as a precaution, parents could choose single vaccines instead. Turns out he had a patent on a single measles vaccine. Now, creating demand for their own product isn't the only explanation. It could also be that if a company discovered this really dangerous problem, then they would be motivated to research a solution. But if we look at the date the patent was filed, it's almost a year before they posted this petition. The patent shows benzoyl peroxide forming benzene at 50 degrees, as well as ways to adjust these formulations to reduce benzene. Experiments take time to run, patents take time to write. Plus, this patent includes info from 2022, doesn't say which info, but you usually discover a problem before you solve it. So to me, it seems like either Valisure genuinely believes that this is an extremely alarming health issue, but didn't warn the public for over a year, probably over 2 years, until a more commercially convenient time. Or they don't actually think it's that serious and they're just hyping up how scary it is for reasons. And this isn't the first time that they've withheld alarming findings. According to the Wall Street Journal, Valishure's president's brother-in-law owns a law firm. They filed class action suits about Zantac on the same day as Valishure's announcement in 2019. And this is linked to one of their earliest unrealistic, realistic conditions, which seems to be like one of Valishure's core personality traits. They co-authored this study that supposedly showed Zantac could produce NDMA in the stomach, and this was used in a whole bunch of lawsuits. That's another interesting Wakefield parallel. He was hired by a class action lawyer to run his study. But the stomach conditions that Valisure used had 70 to 88,000 times as much nitrite as you would find in an actual person's stomach. Nitrite speeds up NDMA formation. When the FDA replicated this, they found that nothing happened until 50 times the normal nitrite. And this quote from Valishure's co-founder really sums up how they come across for me. Independent studies, even if flawed, you don't say, that support our findings are useful. And with dry shampoo, again, the timing is sus. Class action lawsuits based on Valishure's data were filed in September, but they only posted their results publicly in November. So it looks like Valisure probably gave these alarming results to lawyers so they could look for people to bring the lawsuit months before bothering to warn anyone else. This article is also very interesting. Unilever are getting sued over benzene in their dry shampoo, and in their court filing they say Valisure sent it a proposed agreement to pay Valisure. Unilever would pay Valisure $1.25 million up front, plus $250,000 a month over the term of the agreement. In return, Valisure would keep its Unilever testing information confidential, not telling people that you found a known human carcinogen if you get hush money.
Valisure, goddamn heroes.
I don't have a good ending. There's just so much I cut out because there's overwhelming amounts of, to me, offensively bad science from people who I feel like have to know better. So, like and subscribe, I guess.